Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Non-point source pollution, as you know at this point, is caused by rainfall or snowmelt moving over the ground, through the ground, carrying pollutants as it goes, and depositing them into water bodies. The 319 grant program, as was mentioned earlier, was funded by Section 319 of the Clean Water Act to deal with non-point source pollution, which is, at this point in time, the biggest cause of pollution in the country. The grants from this 319 supported program fund the abatement of non-point source pollution to restore and protect water quality pursuant to the Clean Water Act and the Massachusetts Surface Water Quality Standards. The eligibility is pretty open. We will fund any public or private organization, including tribal, county, city, town organizations, as well as other substates planning organizations and interstate agencies. We do not fund federal agencies, FYI. Projects can be located in municipal separate storm sewer system areas. If they meet the 319 grant program requirements and will be completed, if a 319 grant funds a project, if they will be completed before they are required by the MS4 permit. Please note that projects in MS4 areas cannot be required by any permit and cannot be used. My understanding is the pollutant removal numbers from the 319 supported projects cannot be used to meet pollutant removal goals as set by the EPA. So please keep that in mind if you're working in an MS4 regulated or a mixed MS4 and non-MS4 regulated area. We cannot fund things that will be required, such as mapping sewer systems, doing assessment work and things like that, as per your MS4 permit. If you have a mixed community that's partially regulated, a partially regulated MS4 community and one that's not, and the project's not in the unregulated area, then you don't have to worry about MS4 requirements. Let's see. So, as has been mentioned, we want the main goal of this program is to get impaired water bodies off the integrated list. The integrated list is a list that we submit biannually to the EPA for review and approval, and it's a list of waters in the state that do not meet our water quality standards. There'll be a link to the integrated list in the notes, of course. There are 5 main categories of impairments in the integrated list, and the 319 grant program is focused on 4A, 4C, and 5. Some of the other elements aren't as competitive. If there's no use assessed, then we have no idea that a particular water body might need help unless somebody else's source of defensible data. For this particular granting round, we've got 3 project types. Implementation projects, of course, to restore impaired waters, implementation projects to protect healthy waters, and projects to restore nitrogen impacted coastal waters. The most competitive proposals will advance the non-point source program goals. Those goals are in the plan and will be accessible by a link. The most competitive proposals will incorporate a watershed-based approach. As I briefly mentioned earlier, we would like to see a watershed-based approach. If you have a problem in a pond, not just to say, well, we've got weeds or higher nutrients, but we've got the source of nutrients from the entire watershed, and this is how we're going to deal with these sources. Having a more a focused approach to just the sediment doesn't talk about the sources, and it's a less competitive approach. The watershed-based plan should include what your project is all about. If it's not, there's something missing from your plan, and that might be a problem. So something to think about as you put your watershed-based plan together. And one of the elements we use to assess the competitiveness of a proposal is the feasibility. Is it ready to go? Are all the permits in hand? Federal permits can take quite a long time. So if it might require a federal permit, please include a discussion about how the federal permits will be in hand in a timely way. Does the timeline of the project make sense? Is it too long? Is it too short? The funding is for this particular round will last about 2.5 years. So if permitting takes a year, will there be enough time to finish design work and construct the project before the time is due? Is there stakeholder support? Sometimes we encounter projects where local communities aren't in the loop. They haven't been brought in. The community has not been engaged. And those in the planning offices have done a really good job of putting together a project, but not explaining it to the community, and that sometimes creates some friction. So please demonstrate in your project proposal narrative that you have stakeholder support. Also, do you have access to the site? Can you build there? Can you maintain the project, the BMP after it has been completed? If you don't own the land, then perhaps an MOU would suffice, but that would be up to you on how to demonstrate that you have access to the project site. Also, if you submit a proposal for some 319 funds to address a pollutant, please be sure that that's the impairment. If you have a pond that's suffering from excessive phosphorus, but you're more interested in sediment, that might not be the most competitive approach. You might want to consider both and really focus on the phosphorus first and the sediment second, if phosphorus is indeed the key pollutant in this situation. We can't emphasize enough that projects have to be ready to go. If elements are not ready and there's too much time that could be lost, then we don't want to rush things at the end of the project period. So the more competitive projects will demonstrate that they're ready to go as soon as the contract is finalized. There'll be much more information on the competitiveness of proposals in the RFP. As you put together your proposal, be sure to complete the eligibility form. That is a requirement. The watershed-based plan should be part of your proposal, but as mentioned earlier, if it's not complete yet, it can be completed by the time the contract is started. Of course, we won't pay for it because the contract hasn't started yet. So it's payments on a reimbursement basis starting on the contract start date. So just keep that in mind as you put together a proposal and are working on a watershed-based plan that may or may not have been completed. The problem definition has to be very clear. There should be some background information that would justify your approach and the strategy and the BMP types. Does the project make sense? One of the things we look at in terms of BMP construction is, does the town or the folks responsible for maintenance, do they have the right equipment or training, or are they going to farm that out? Has that been discussed in the narrative? Again, permitting, that's a huge one for us. Please be sure that all elements of permitting have been thoroughly discussed in your proposal. Please include pollutant load reductions in your proposal, and do not give us percentages removed. If you're going to install BMPs that will remove 50% of the sediment, for example, don't tell us how much. Don't tell us that it's going to remove 50%. Please tell us how many tons of sand or how many pounds of phosphorus. That is the best way to give us a competitive proposal, is to give us a very clear number of what you're going to remove. It gives us a chance to evaluate proposals one to another. Again, as mentioned earlier, active and community engagement is a big part of our program, and it's a big part of successful BMP implementation. So please keep that in mind as you develop a project. Start talking with the local community who may have some very useful ideas that it can help inform the proposal. Another thing to think about is it an MPS priority project? Also give us a sense of your technical and project management strength. If you're a smaller community, that's okay. And if you have technical and managerial shortcomings due to staffing, that's okay. Just farm it out to somebody else who knows what they're doing, and make sure you discuss who you're going to bring on board, and what their skill sets are. The proposals should be responsive to what the RFPs are asking for. If you're asking for a flood mitigation project, that's not really about non-point source pollution. So try to frame your proposals in terms of the RFP criteria. As Megan had said in regard to the 604B program, assume the reviewer is not familiar with your project. If there's some past history there of work that had been done, include that in your narrative. Include discussions on who's going to be involved in the decision-making process. Of course, the project has to be focused on remediating non-point source pollution. The evaluation criteria are quite important. They'll be in the RFP, and they'll be used to evaluate each proposal. It's going to be competitive. Last funding round, we received 30 proposals. We anticipate having quite a bit again this year. So the more you track the evaluation criteria and try to answer all those elements in your proposal, the better it will be. Please be sure your budget supports what you're trying to do. Does it make sense? Is there enough money for the BMP? Is there enough money for some of the engagement work? Is there enough money for the design work? Please be aware that we can only pay for mileage, travel mileage. We don't pay for any other travel-related expenses, and mileage is only at 70 cents per mile. In terms of designs, I believe this came up earlier in the chat. Conceptual or better are expected. In the past, applicants have cut and pasted designs from online showing how they want to put in a rain garden that will treat water from a deep sump catch basin and then release it. But if we don't have design work that shows us the volumes, that shows us where the BMPs will fit into the available landscape, that shows us that the cost, that the proposed cost makes sense for what is being proposed, then the designs aren't detailed enough. They should support the anticipated pollutant removal numbers, and they should support the dollars requested, and should fit into the timeline. So in terms of adequate designs, you really need to know enough to demonstrate that in your proposal, so that we're confident that whatever is being proposed will work well and will work in a timely way. Completed designs are not required in your proposal, but and we can fund some design work to finalize conceptual designs, but please be sure that the conceptual designs submitted are adequate enough to give us enough information to be able to evaluate your project proposal. Again, pollutant removal numbers anticipated have to be in units, pounds, CFUs, what have you. Please don't give us percentages. As Megan had mentioned, the grantees for 604B grant projects must comply with the federal DBE goals. We're not tracking those on our end, but grantees have to track that on their own end. And please include letters of support. If you're working on a public school grounds, do you have a letter from the principal or the school board? If a town DPW is anticipating building some BMPs to deal with some runoff, is there a letter of support from the decision makers on the higher level in town, or those who are entrusted with signing contracts? Be sure that the letters of support are there for everybody contributing to the project. And if the land is not owned by the project proponent, that's okay. Just give us a letter of support from the owner, saying that they're willing to allow access for construction and maintenance for the life of the BMP. This funding round, we anticipate 2.5 million, as Padmini had mentioned. We expect to fund 15 to 30 projects. There's no match. Thank you, Padmini. And projects will last about 2.5 years from the moment of the start of the contract. The repayment is on a reimbursement basis. We reimburse after invoices are submitted with supporting documentation, and we withhold the final 10% of the total grant award. Once all the deliverables have been met and submitted and approved and accepted, then we'll release that final 10%. We anticipate releasing the request for proposals on August 19th. So prior to that, please call and email with questions if you don't have all of them answered today. We're happy to talk about project proposals or small details, anything in between now and the time the RFP is issued. Once it's issued, we can't be helpful at all about anything specific. We can help you find information online in terms of where the RFP is, but we can't help you with conceptual ideas and how to make them more competitive. We will post the RFP on Combis, the DEP's website, and via email blast. We anticipate proposals being due approximately 2 months later, and then they'll be reviewed and going through a procurement process. We anticipate notifying applicants in winter of 2027, and contract start dates late winter, early spring. There's numerous additional sites that can be very helpful in proposal development. I'm not going to go through them now, but you can access the links online later on. A couple things to think about. The Inspire tool gives a lot of information on prior project types. Gives you an example of what you might want to do in a particular area that somebody else might have already done. The Clean Water Toolkit is also quite useful in putting together project ideas and giving you a little bit more information on sort of a micro watershed approach. Some things to think about is the BMP. Will it address a certain volume of rains? With more frequent storms, you might want to consider, depending on the BMP, sizing them for the storm that's going to come in 20 or 30 years. And you can get some of the data on those storms from the UNH, the Stormwater Center, and from Cornell. So something to think about as you put together proposals for BMPs. And I'll just buzz through a couple quick examples and we'll get to some questions. So this is just a simple rain garden in a parking lot, a hot one in Leominster. We've also installed very similar in Greenfield. So the rainwater is actually being collected and held, cooled down, and the pollutants are absorbed and before it's released. Very simple. It adds beauty to some parking lots that maybe have no features. Not very complicated, robust. And these kinds of rain gardens reduce a fair amount of nutrients and bacteria as well as sediment if they're properly maintained. This is a larger catch basin in Lexington that treats approximately 25 acres. And they're removing approximately 36 pounds of phosphorus per year before going into Reservoir Pond. Quite a successful project. It treats a fair amount of runoff from roads in a residential area. They had the real estate to put in a multi-tiered rain garden, and it worked out quite well. This cost about $300,000. in grant and $600,000 in match. This is a infiltration basin we set up, help support for the middle pond and Kangman ponds. This treats runoff from a 4-foot pipe that was leading, bringing polluted water from roads, mostly roads and some residential area, straight into the Middle Lake. And this is set up to treat a 25-year storm. The road on the left is for maintenance. And that, very simple project. You can see the weir at the back. It can hold back certain volumes, and once it gets to a very high point, it can release them without damaging the BMP. So very simple, very robust. Another options would be subsurface infiltration systems. The key for these is to make sure you have pre-treatment to capture all the sediments so you don't damage the infiltration capacity of the systems. These require less real estate, but more maintenance in some regard. This is another infiltration system in Stoughton that treats approximately 20 acres, including their elementary school and the school's parking lots and access roads. They were lucky enough to have the real estate. This cost about $150,000 total, and it captures all the sediment running off from that acreage and quite a bit of the bacteria and nutrients. Very simple. They were lucky enough to have the real estate to do this. And then the Mystic River Watershed Association has been putting a lot of small-scale infiltration BMPs underneath sidewalks and in the rights of way, connected to deep sump catch basins, and they're treating small amounts of runoff, but they're putting in so many of these that the overall volume of phosphorus being reduced from going into the Mystic River is quite significant. They're able to install these generally 2 a day with a crew of 4, and they cost about $14,000 each, which for the amount of phosphorus being removed is actually pretty competitive. Let's see. So let's get to the questions.